embers of fate. The bell above the door of Turning Pages bookstore chimed as the autumn breeze carried in a swirl of crimson leaves and the tall figure of a stranger. Tessa Monroe glanced up from her inventory sheet, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. At 34, she'd perfected the polite smile that welcomed customers without inviting conversation. "Just browsing," the man said, his voice carrying a gentle rasp that suggested either too many late nights or stories left untold. "Take your time," Tessa replied, returning to her work. But she found herself stealing glances as he moved through the narrow aisles, his fingertips brushing book spines with unexpected reverence. Pine Ridge was too small for unfamiliar faces. Everyone knew everyone, and more importantly, everyone knew Tessa's story. It protected her from unwanted questions and sympathy. This stranger, with his broad shoulders and contemplative expression, was an anomaly. When he finally approached the counter with a collection of Jack London stories, their eyes met properly. His were the color of warm honey crinkled at the corners from too much sun. "Ethan Rivera," he said, extending a hand. "Just moved here for the season. Tessa Monroe." "Welcome to Pine Ridge." Their handshake lingered half a second too long. "Fire prevention program," he explained, noticing her unspoken question. "I'm with the Volunteer Firefighter Exchange. The Forest Service is worried about the drought." Tessa nodded, suddenly aware of the parched hills surrounding their town. 3 months without rain had transformed the lush landscape into a tinderbox waiting for a spark. "You picked quite the time to visit," she said, handing him his change. "The Harvest Festival is this weekend." "That's actually why I'm here. We're setting up a booth. Fire safety, community outreach, that sort of thing." Something in his manner, earnest without being overbearing, made Tessa say, "I'm on the festival committee. If you need any help." His smile revealed a dimple in his left cheek. "I might take you up on that." Later that evening, as Tessa locked up the shop and walked the 3 blocks to her small cottage, she thought about Ethan Rivera. It had been 4 years since the accident that took her sister and brother-in-law, leaving her to raise their daughter, Willow. 4 years of carefully constructed routine, of focusing solely on the bookstore and giving 11-year-old Willow the stability she deserved. She hadn't made space for new people. "Hadn't wanted to. Aunt Tessa, look what I made!" Willow called as Tessa entered their home, the scent of cinnamon and apples greeting her. Her niece, so much like her mother it sometimes hurt to look at her, proudly held up a poster for the Harvest Festival. "It's beautiful." "Pumpkin," Tessa said, examining the carefully drawn flames bordered by safety tips. "For school?" "Ms. Harrison says the firefighters need them for their booth," Willow explained. "A real firefighter from California is coming to talk to our class tomorrow." That night, as wind rattled the windows and the radio warned of continuing drought, Tessa dreamed of fire for the first time in years. But unlike the nightmares that had plagued her after losing her sister, this time there was someone walking through the flames, unafraid. Through smoke and shadow, the morning dawned blood red through a haze that had settled overnight. Tessa woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the distant wail of sirens. Her phone buzzed with emergency alerts. Wildfires spotted in the eastern ridge, evacuation warnings for outlying areas. "School's canceled," she told Willow, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's pack some essentials just in case." By noon, ash was falling like gray snow. Tessa closed the bookstore early, her thoughts racing between practical concerns and memories of the precious items at home. Her sister's journals, the family photographs, irreplaceable pieces of a life lost too soon. "The fire jumped the ridge line," said Mrs. Donovan, her elderly neighbor clutching her cat carrier. "They're saying Pine Creek Road is already blocked," Tessa's heart stuttered. Their cottage sat just off Pine Creek Road. "Willow!" "She's safe," Mrs. Donovan assured her. The elementary school buses took all the children to the high school shelter. "I saw them go." Relief flooded through Tessa, followed immediately by determination. She had time to save what couldn't be replaced. The drive home was surreal. The familiar winding road now flanked by orange glows dancing between trees. The air thickened with each mile. When she reached the cottage, she could see the advancing line of fire, perhaps 2 miles away but moving with horrifying speed. Inside, Tessa moved with frantic purpose. Her sister's wedding album, Willow's baby book, the handwritten letters from their parents, all went into her late brother-in-law's old firefighter duffel bag. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was reaching for the last box in the attic when she heard it, the distinctive crack of a tree falling, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Heat rushed in. Smoke billowed up the attic stairs. A burning branch had punched through the living room window, igniting the curtains. The front door was blocked by flames in seconds. Tessa retreated to the bathroom, duffel clutched to her chest. A wet towel pressed against her face as smoke filled the small house. Trapped. The window was too small. The drop too far. Through her fear, she heard the impossible. Someone calling her name. Tessa! Tessa! Ethan's voice, somehow impossibly, outside her bedroom window. Here! She screamed, stumbling toward the sound. In here! The window shattered, and there he was, face streaked with soot, eyes fierce with determination. He'd climbed the old oak tree that brushed against the house. Give me the bag, he ordered. Then your hands, the duffel went first. Then Ethan's strong grip pulled her through the window, glass cutting her arms as the floor behind her groaned with heat. Hold on to me, he said as they maneuvered down the tree. Below them, a fire truck had arrived, firefighters shouting instructions. The moment they touched ground, the cottage's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and timber. Ethan didn't release her hand as they ran toward the truck, embers raining around them, the roar of the fire drowning out all else except his voice close to her ear. I've got you. Keep moving. Later, in the chaos of the high school gymnasium-turned-evacuation center, Tessa found Willow among the other children. As they clung to each other, she looked up to see Ethan across the room. Oxygen mask temporarily removed, his eyes finding hers through the crowd. He'd returned to the fire line immediately after bringing her to safety, refusing medical attention despite the burns on his hands and the gash along his temple where falling debris had struck him. Only now, watching him prepare to head back into danger, did Tessa realize the duffel bag, her sister's memories, was still clutched in her arms. He'd saved both her past and her future. Silent healing. 3 weeks after the fire, Pine Ridge existed in a state of suspended grief. The wildfire had claimed 37 homes, including Tessa's cottage. No lives were lost, a miracle, everyone said. Tessa knew exactly who to thank for that particular miracle. She and Willow had moved into the apartment above the bookstore, untouched by the flames that had devastated the eastern part of town. The space was small but functional, with slanted ceilings and windows that caught the morning light. Tessa had reopened the store as soon as possible, creating a community gathering place when people needed it most. Ethan appeared on a Tuesday afternoon, right arm bandaged from wrist to elbow, a healing cut above his right eyebrow. Tessa was shelving books when she heard the bell. We're having a sale on Jack London, she said without turning, recognizing his distinctive tread. Good thing I saved my copy from the fire truck, he replied, his voice huskier than she remembered. They regarded each other across the shop. In the artificial calm after disaster, neither seemed to know what to say next. How did you thank someone for risking their life? What words could possibly bridge that chasm? Coffee? She finally offered. I keep a pot going in the back. They sat in the small reading nook, surrounded by children's books and the faint smell of cinnamon that Tessa used to mask the lingering smoke that seemed to permeate everything. How's Willow doing? He asked. Nightmares, Tessa admitted. But she's resilient. More than me sometimes. Kids often are. His eyes clouded. My brother was. Tessa waited, sensing a story that wanted telling. I was 19 when our house caught fire, Ethan said, staring into his mug. Faulty wiring. I got my parents out, but Trevor, he was 7, was hiding in his closet. By the time I found him, his voice broke. That's why you became a firefighter, Tessa realized. He nodded. Couldn't save him, but maybe I could save someone else. You did. She reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his bandaged arm. You saved me. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared scars, both visible and hidden. Over the following days, a routine developed. Ethan would stop by the bookstore in the afternoons, sometimes helping Tessa reorganize shelves, other times just sitting in the reading nook with his notebook. He'd mentioned once that he used to write before the firefighting took over his life. Willow adored him immediately, especially after discovering he could draw dragons that looked actually real. Aunt Tessa, not like the ones in books. On weekends, they'd take walks through the unburned parts of town, Willow running ahead to collect fallen leaves, while Tessa and Ethan talked about everything and nothing. Neither mentioned that his assignment in Pine Ridge was temporary. 4 months to help with fire prevention and rebuilding efforts. Already 1 month had passed. Do you miss it? Tessa asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the bookstore roof, Willow already asleep in the apartment below. The city, I mean. Real coffee shops. Restaurants that don't serve the same 3 specials every week. Ethan considered this, his profile gilded by the fading light. I miss the anonymity sometimes. In Sacramento, no one knows I'm the guy who couldn't save his brother. Here you're the hero who saved the bookstore lady, Tessa said with a small smile. Is that what they're calling you? The bookstore lady? His eyes crinkled at the corners. I thought you were Tessa Monroe, committee member extraordinaire, maker of the best cinnamon coffee in 3 counties. And, he hesitated, the woman I can't stop thinking about. The admission hung between them. Honest and terrifying. I'm also a coward, she whispered. I haven't been brave enough to start over since you lost your sister, he finished. That doesn't make you a coward, Tessa. It makes you human. As the stars emerged above them, Tessa realized she'd been holding her breath for 4 years. Maybe it was time to exhale. Paige's unwritten rebuilding began in earnest as autumn deepened into winter. Tessa's insurance money came through, but instead of reconstructing the cottage, she decided to renovate the bookstore's unused 2nd floor into a proper apartment. The choice felt symbolic, building upon what remained rather than trying to recreate what was lost. This wall could come down, Ethan suggested one Saturday, tapping the plaster, separating what would become their living room from the kitchen. Open concept. More light. Tessa noticed his choice of words. Their living room, but didn't correct him. Over the past 2 months, the lines between friendship and something deeper had blurred. He'd never pressed for definitions, seeming to understand her caution. Willow would like that, she agreed. She's been sketching floor plans. Apparently she needs a creative corner now. Smart kid. Ethan smiled, then reached into his backpack. Speaking of creativity, I found something you might like. He handed her a worn leather journal. Inside were short stories, poems, character sketches, all in Ethan's neat handwriting. You didn't just used to write, Tessa said, turning pages with growing amazement. Ethan, these are good. Really good, he shrugged, embarrassment coloring his features. After Trevor died, words were the only thing that made sense. Then firefighting took over and I just stopped. Why show me now? Because you reminded me that surviving isn't the same as living. His honey brown eyes met hers. I've been running into fires for 10 years. Tessa, maybe it's time I built something instead of just saving what others have created. That evening, after Willow had gone to sleep, Tessa pulled out her sister's journals, the ones Ethan had helped her save from the fire. She'd never been able to read them before, too raw with grief. Now, she opened to the first page. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, her sister had written. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Tears blurred Tessa's vision. All this time she'd been frozen, afraid to move forward, terrified that loving again meant betraying those she'd lost. The next day, she marched into the town hall where Ethan was helping coordinate rebuilding efforts. I need your help with something, she announced, ignoring the curious glances from volunteers. She placed a flyer on the table before him. The Winter Literary Festival. The committee needs a featured author. Ethan stared at the flyer, then at her. Tessa, I'm not a real writer. You are, she insisted. You just need a deadline and some motivation. He laughed, the sound warming her more than the space heater struggling against December's chill. And what motivation would that be? Dinner, she said boldly. At a real restaurant, not Maggie's diner, just us. After the reading, his expression softened. That sounds an awful lot like a date, bookstore lady. That's because it is, firefighter man. The literary festival became their shared project. Evenings were spent editing Ethan's stories while Willow drew illustrations for the festival program. During the day, construction continued on their apartment, walls coming down as others were reinforced. Sometimes Tessa caught herself making plans beyond the 4 months of Ethan's assignment. Dangerous thoughts. And yet, as the pages of his manuscript grew, so did her courage to imagine a future different from the safe, small life she'd clung to for so long. The night before the festival, snow fell, the first of the season. Tessa stood at the bookstore window watching white flakes erase the last visible scars of the wildfire. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, joining her. "That endings are also beginnings," she replied. "If you're brave enough to turn the page." His hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining like the stories they'd begun to write together. Beyond the ashes, the envelope arrived on a crisp February morning, Sacramento Fire Department insignia stamped in the corner. Tessa felt its weight before Ethan even showed it to her. "They've offered me the battalion chief position," he said, voice carefully neutral as they sat in the newly finished apartment kitchen. "It's a promotion. Better pay, more stability." Tessa nodded, throat tight. "When would you start?" "April 1st, 6 weeks away." His 4-month assignment in Pine Ridge had already been extended once, after his winter literary festival reading became the talk of the town. The local paper had run a feature on him, the firefighter-turned-writer who had helped save their community twice over. "You should take it," she said, the words painful but necessary. "It's what you've worked for." Ethan studied her face. "Is that what you want?" "No," she wanted to scream. What she wanted was for time to stop, for this fragile happiness they'd built to continue unchanged. What she wanted was never to face loss again. "What I want," she said carefully, "is for you to be happy." He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. The burn scars had faded to pink, but they would always be there, reminders of what they'd survived. "I've been thinking about something your sister wrote in her journal," he said. "About life being about dancing in the rain." Tessa's breath caught. She'd shared those journals with him piece by piece as winter deepened. "What if there's another option besides me leaving or staying?" he continued. "What if we find our own dance?" That night, after Willow had fallen asleep surrounded by sketches for a new story they were creating together, Tessa and Ethan sat on the rooftop where they'd first acknowledged their feelings. "Sacramento is 3 hours away," Ethan said, looking up at the stars. "I could come back on weekends, or you and Willow could visit. We could make it work until what?" He turned to face her fully. "Until we figure out where home really is. For all of us." A week later, Tessa stood in turning pages, surveying the empty spaces on her shelves. The sign in the window announced a new addition to the store, the Firelight Cafe, opening April 15th. The renovation would take the back quarter of the bookshop, creating a coffee and reading space that could host events. "Are you sure about this?" asked Mrs. Donovan, who had volunteered to watch the store while Tessa and Willow made their first visit to Sacramento. "About the cafe or about Ethan?" Tessa smiled. "Both, I suppose." Tessa considered the question seriously. "I've spent 4 years afraid of change, afraid of loving too much and losing again. But the fire taught me something. We don't get to choose what we lose, only what we save." The drive to Sacramento felt like crossing a threshold. Willow chattered excitedly in the back seat about seeing Ethan's apartment and visiting the big city library. Tessa listened, hands steady on the wheel as mountains gave way to valley. Ethan was waiting for them outside his apartment building, looking both familiar and strange in his formal uniform. When he swept Willow into a hug and then carefully, reverently kissed Tessa, she felt pieces clicking into place. That evening, after Willow had fallen asleep in the guest room, surrounded by new books Ethan had bought her, they sat on his small balcony overlooking the city lights. "I sent some of my stories to a publisher in San Francisco," he said quietly. They want to see more. Tessa felt a burst of pride. Ethan, that's wonderful. It got me thinking. He took her hand. What if the cafe isn't just for coffee? What if it's a place for writers? Workshops, readings, a small press someday? The vision expanded in Tessa's mind. Her bookstore growing into something new, something they could build together regardless of physical distance. A literary cafe, she mused. Half in Sacramento, half in Pine Ridge? For now, he agreed. And later. We'll see where the story takes us. As spring unfolded, they settled into a rhythm of weekends together and weekdays apart. The distance was difficult but navigable. The cafe renovation progressed, as did Ethan's writing and Tessa's healing. 1 year to the day after the wildfire, they gathered on the spot where Tessa's cottage had once stood. The land remained hers, though she had no plans to rebuild. Instead, they planted a garden, wildflowers, hardy trees, new life emerging from scorched earth as Willow ran ahead, placing painted stones among the seedlings. Ethan took Tessa's hand. I was thinking, he said, that maybe next year we could plant a wedding tree here. Tessa looked at him, at the man who had walked through fire to find her, who understood her fear and her courage in equal measure. I'd like that, she said, voice steady and sure, a new story rising from the ashes. Around them, the first green shoots of spring pushed through blackened soil, fragile, persistent, alive.